Hello, Watem here, welcome back to more Umineko When Seagulls Cry. Essentially for the last one for this episode, so let's get on with the tea party for episode 4. Second day, October 5th, 1986. Interesting. This is different, I think. Pretty sure. No? Past midday? Going for the whole second day? So like 11, was it 50? Or maybe it was going past midnight and then to midday. Yeah. I don't have a clue what's going on. Please, someone explain in a way even I can understand what happened yesterday. I was in the kitchen of a mansion, grabbing some food without permission. You open up that massive business class refrigerator, you can find anything. You can eat and drink as much as you like. Even if a typhoon didn't clear up for a week, I'd have more than enough to eat. With wine in one hand, I was helping myself to some dry cured ham. I wondered just how expensive this wine and ham are. Your ingredients are out of luck too. If only you'd had God a son to cook you. Oh, okay. You could have been reborn as much more incredible food. He's talking to the food, or she, whoever this is. I looked at the clock. Very soon it would be midnight. Okay. October 5th, the second day, would end. The insane October 4th, yesterday, seemed like a lie. How much? Nothing had happened after that test thing. Nothing happened. No phone call came, no letters came. No person came. No one attacked me. Nothing happened at all. I want to start demanding a refund on all that time and energy that tension stole from me. After that, for an entire day, a full 24 hours, nothing happened. But surely nothing's gonna happen now. A full 24 hours ago, Beatrice called me to the spot in front of the mansion's entrance. There, I was given a strange test to determine the success rate of headship, or whatever. I gave a serious answer in my own way, but it somehow hadn't meshed with the other side. Beatrice got pissed for no reason and fell silent. I yelled at her to try and say something. She gave no answer. When I asked where Maria was, she just told me to go to the chapel and left. To tell the truth, it was an anticlimax. No matter what kind of weird test you give, at least tell me whether I've passed or failed. Are you trying to say, thanks for coming, your results will be mailed to you later, or something? Quit messing with me. Anyway, I then headed to the chapel, dead Maria. After failing their tests, both George, Anarchy and Jessica were killed. I couldn't let Maria get killed too. Also, I might get a chance to catch some person trying to kill her. As a little kid, I often heard from Jessica that you'd get in trouble if you went near the chapel. Near the chapel, I think, is related to getting into or finding the gold. Supposedly, there's a well entrance. I don't know how much we can necessarily trust that, since it was information that we got from the witch side, and none of that seemed very serious. But yeah. In any case, so I'd never been there, but I at least knew where it was. Couldn't find any trace of a person there. There was a key bundle lying in front of the door. I thought this might be someone telling me to open the door, but after trying all the keys, I found that none of them fit. I also called Maria's name, but there was no answer whatsoever. I searched around the chapel. There was a limit to what I could do in the pitch black with just a flashlight. I realized that this key bundle might be a set of master keys, which could make it possible to open the door to the mansion. Found no sign of Maria, so I returned to the mansion. The mansion was wrapped in silence, and in a horrible stench. However, it's amazing how good humans are at adapting. The inside of the mansion must still be wrapped up in that smell. However, I grew completely used to it and stopped minding it. It didn't seem any worse than any old house where someone had burnt some meat. Kinzo in the furnace again? Perhaps? At first I was bewildered by the stench, but I decided to head to the dining hall for the time being. Found those corpses that were so pitiful. Gorda-san and the rest had hesitated to speak of them in detail. It was the remains of Aunt Natsui and the others who'd become the first victims. Half of each head had been completely split open. It was so gruesome that even without knowing a thing about examining corpses, I could say that they were 100% dead. And on top of that, the remaining halves of their faces were left like normal, so it was even easy to identify them. Really convenient corpses these were. And, in addition to those 6 bodies, there was one more. Oh, the 7th corpse was Maria. She lay next to Aunt Rosa, though sleeping alongside her. I cried. The death of an innocent young girl, and at the cruel way my dad and the rest had died. I raced through the mansion, swinging the hat-stand spear, yelling, "Come out here, bastard!" But I couldn't find any trace of anyone else. Thinking they might be planning to hide somewhere and attack me from behind, I went around searching for hiding places, sometimes growing more cautious, sometimes intentionally letting my guard down in various ways. But in the end, not even a kitten appeared. Then, morning came. My tension and fatigue combined with my drowsiness, making for the worst kind of dawn. Humans are pretty incredible. Even when a murderer might be hiding somewhere, we prioritize drowsiness and fatigue over our own lives. At that time, I was starting to feel pretty ridiculous. After all, for a full 6 hours before dawn, I'd walked around the mansion, yelling at the culprits to show themselves. The search had been a careful one, and I tired myself out and let my guard down. Even so, no one came to attack me. Basically, I lost patience with them and figured they could do whatever the hell they wanted. The boat wouldn't come until the typhoon passes. They said on TV that it won't pass until tomorrow, so I've got another full day today. Lazing about lost its interest, and even though I knew it would probably make the police mad, I decided to play detective a bit. First was the dining hall, where the very first murder had occurred. The 6 who had been killed in the beginning really were pitiful. The weapon used was probably a gun. Maybe their heads were split by something powerful, like a magnum bullet or a shotgun. It was a reasonable theory to hold. Also possible that they did it later. Compared to that, the 7th corpse, Maria, had died in a much better and cleaner way. At a glance, I could see no external wounds, and didn't understand how she'd been killed. But by her mouth were traces of bubbles that she might have spat out. It looked like a typical death by poisoning that you might see in a TV drama. Wasn't Maria called out to the chapel and given a test? Why was she in the corpse-filled dining hall, lying next to her mother, dead? Even if the cause of death was poison, who gave it to her? Her clothes weren't disturbed at all. It's hard to imagine that she was forcibly pushed down and given an injection of poison. Probably better to assume that she was given a capsule of poison or something and made to swallow it. Compared to the scattered and violently mutilated corpses in this room, Maria's corpse was too clean. If they had a gun, they only needed to pull the trigger. Poisoning, whether by having her drink it or by an injection, would take a lot more effort. Considering the culprit's brutal nature, you'd think Maria's death alone was given special treatment. Why was only Maria given a sleep-like death? True, being killed is always a pitiful thing. But for some reason, Maria's death alone seemed very courteous to me. Both Maria's hands were joined on her chest, as though the dead person had put them there herself. Herself? Oh, the dead person, as in Maria. Right. Did Maria do that herself before dying? Isn't this usually something done by someone else after the person dies? As though sleeping with her mother, whose head was half crushed, Maria dozed in peace. For some reason, that contrast really bugged me. Including the direct cause, it's probably safe to say Maria's death is shrouded in mystery. More than anything else, the biggest mystery of this dining hall was the pitfalls. Pitfalls that both Uncle Krause's group and Gorda-san had mentioned. After the first 6 were killed, 5 more fell through pitfalls and were captured. What are pitfalls? Those things that suddenly open and you fall through them, right? The room had a solid floor with a carpet that looked dignified, if a bit worn out. No matter how you looked at it, it was a single piece. If a pitfall had opened there, there would have to be a seam just in that place. And if there had been some trick like a pitfall, wouldn't it creak when you walked on it? No matter how much I walked around, feeling the carpet, I just couldn't imagine that a pitfall was hidden here. Anyway, it would be one thing if a single person fell, but if all 5 people did. And you haven't seen any of their bodies, have you? You've gotten phone calls, no bodies. By putting together everyone's stories, each one of them had fallen from a different location. So at the very least, there had to be 5 separate places with pitfalls. What does this mean? Was this room actually made with pitfalls across the entire floor? That by pushing a button, you could open a pitfall in the location of your choice? Some kind of contraption like that? That kind of ridiculous mechanism would be surprising, even in a ninja mansion. But if Dad and the rest had heard about this, I wonder if they'd say, I wouldn't put it past grandfather to do it, to make it. At any rate, I didn't learn anything more from the dining hall. Do pitfalls exist? Do the pitfalls not exist? Or do they exist, but I can't find them, amateur that I am? I can't say for sure. Since they claim that the pitfalls were there, I can't ignore them, even if I can't find them. Next ones to be killed were Jessica and George Anarchy. I discovered George Anarchy when I'd been called out for my test. He'd been called out to the arbor of the rose garden, and, probably, shot him in the forehead with a gun. Jessica had been called to her own room on the 2nd floor of the mansion. The door to her room was locked. That wasn't a problem at all, since I had a master key. Inside the room, it was horrible. But after the dining hall, I was used to corpses, so I built up a bit of an amenity. My phone receiver was loose and dangling. Had she been killed while still on the phone with me? Jessica was leaning against the wall right next to it, with half of her head split open. As far as I could tell by glancing at the scene, it looked as though she'd been killed while on the phone. In that case, had the culprit been right there before her eyes? I hadn't gotten that impression when listening to Jessica's voice over the phone. Pretty sure Jessica said, "They got me." Probably best to assume that she'd already received a fatal wound at the time of the phone call. That's right, and she also said this.
バトラが来た時には 私は頭を半分ぶちまけた死体だよ。
Oddly specific. Yes, that's what she said. From what I could tell by looking at Jessica's corpse, there were no wounds on her other than the damage to her head. Could she have had an injury serious enough to make her prepared for death, and then died halfway through the phone call? The way she talked on the phone made me think that she'd escaped harm for the time being. You couldn't be able to have a casual conversation over the phone if the culprit's right before your eyes. So, the culprit come in partway through the phone call and kill Jessica? No, that can't be right. After all, this room was locked. Wait, that doesn't tell me anything, yeah. The master keys were outside. The culprit stole a master key from one of the victims, locking the door would be meaningless. She had no external wounds other than her head. In that case, should I assume that the fatal wound she was prepared to die from and the actual external wound that damaged her head were two different things? And that both of them were made to do to the same part of her body? In other words, Jessica was struck severely to the head and received an incredibly bad wound. Then she called me and either lost consciousness or died while on the phone. Then the culprit came and damaged her head again, something like that. It's a possibility, but then doesn't quite match up with Jessica saying that she'd be missing half her head. After being called to this room, Jessica was attacked by the culprit and received a serious injury. Then the culprit thought she'd been killed and went away for the time being. But Jessica miraculously started breathing again and called me with what would become her dying message. Then the culprit realised that they'd failed to kill her and rushed back to deliver the final blow after Jessica fell unconscious from massive blood loss. It seemed to add up, more or less. Except for how Jessica was able to accurately predict the nature of that final blow. And there was one more thing that bugged me about the phone call from Jessica. Jessica had said this. How would she know? She said it almost as though she'd witnessed George Anarchy being killed. While you certainly could see the rose garden from the window in Jessica's room, and you could even see the roof of the arbor where George Anarchy had been summoned, it was very far away. Add on with the fact that it was the night of a typhoon, it's very hard to imagine that she was able to witness everything that happened by the arbor from this window. And, more than anything else, Jessica left before George Anarchy, though she shouldn't have known that George Anarchy's test took place by the arbor. Why did Jessica know that George Anarchy had been killed? Also, during my search of the entire mansion, I found Kirie's-san's corpse as well. It was in one of the old guest rooms at the back of the first floor. In the past, before the construction of the guest house, relatives had spent the night in these. Kirie's-san's situation matched Jessica's perfectly. Probably being killed during her phone call with me. The receiver was hanging untidily, and Kirie-san lay crumpled in that corner. The way she had been killed was very different from Jessica. Her head wasn't smashed. Instead, a stake with an occult design was buried into her forehead. So gruesome, I pulled it out. After pulling it, I realised that this might get me into trouble with the police later. But a little late, I set it down by Kirie-san's side. The tip was sharp and stained with enough blood that it must have penetrated fully to the brain. I didn't know what kind of metal it was made of, but it was about as heavy as a paperweight. Certainly, if you stabbed all out with something like this, it might cause a terrible wound. I probably knew what that stake meant. It's one of those. Style of killing from the fourth twilight onwards in the witch's epitaph. Probably that gouge with a stake and kill thing. However, the human skull is very firm. No matter how much someone mustered their strength, would it really have been pierced so neatly? No. In my reasoning, the stake wasn't the cause of death, but had just been used to damage the corpse after death. It was probably killed with a gun or something, like George Anarchy. The stake had been stuck into a hole left by the gun. Thinking of it that way makes it easier to accept. But was Kirie-san really killed with a gun? As she said on the phone, even though she was holed up inside her locked room, Kirie-san was being attacked. In fact, this room had been locked. Doesn't mean anything again, but still. Also, she mentioned a golden thread or something flying in and attacking her. In fact, there were 4 places around Kirie-san's corpse with holes that could have been caused by some kind of attack. Still, golden thread attacked her through the keyhole. Does the hole in the wall go all the way through, or is it only on the inside? I looked at the door from Kirie-san's perspective. It had been one of those old keyholes you see in old mystery movies, where you can peek through to the other side, and then it would have clearly been possible to stick something through it. But even though the doors in this mansion were old-fashioned, the locks were the familiar average cylinder style that you could find in any normal house. In other words, they weren't constructed in a way that would let you penetrate through them. Though, no matter how thin an object you might try to stick through the keyhole, it's unthinkable that something penetrated through from the other outside and attacked. Cylinder lock. And a keyhole? Despite that, Kirie-san definitely said that something like a golden thread had flown in through the keyhole, spun around while aiming for her, and attacked her. Golden thread attacking through a keyhole. I couldn't understand what it meant at all. Even so, Kirie-san probably predicted that I wouldn't be able to understand all this. And it wasn't just Kirie-san. Jessica said it over the phone too. No, since the very beginning, from the time we talked with Koda-san and Kumasawa-san, and got the phone call from Uncle Krause's group, everyone has said the same consistent thing. Grandfather summoned witches and demons, and is killing people with magic. They've been shown that right before their eyes. These weren't tricks or fakes. There was no choice but to believe it. With one voice, they had said it all that. They had all said that. Then the mystery woman calling herself Beatrice appeared. And I had pretty much believed that she was the real witch, might start summoning goat monsters rising left. However, after being left alone for a whole day, my feeling of tension had faded completely. I was now able to think that something so stupid definitely couldn't be true. They lose their heads a little in an extraordinary situation where their lives were exposed to danger, and mistakenly think that a witch was attacking them with magic. Multiple people gave the same kind of testimony. On top of that, none of their opinions conflicted with each other. If it had just been a single statement, I'd be able to suspect that they just didn't see what they thought they saw. But doing that now was pretty difficult. Then, right next to the back door, found Uncle Krause with his head half smashed. Even though he'd escaped the dungeon of Kuadorian, and somehow made it this far by a secret underground passage, he had been killed, buried into the gruesome cross-section of his half-crushed head. It was a stake with an occult design, like the one that had been buried into Kirie-san's forehead. And in this situation, it was very hard to imagine that this stake was the weapon used. He'd been killed with a powerful gun, like the sticks in the dining hall, and after death, had been jabbed with a stake like Kirie-san. I wonder if the golden threads that Kiryu-san spoke of attacked Uncle Kraus too. Does there exist some kind of tool, like an endoscope? It's very thin but can be moved about at will. That can also attack people? No way. I've never heard of anything like that. But even so, if this fact had been revealed to one of her relatives, maybe they'd say, I wouldn't put it past grandfather to make it. Since I can't deny the existence of Gold Thread X that can be moved at will and attack people, I can either accept that this mysterious weapon exists, or else I have to accept that this was murder committed with magic. Or that they were forced to say this. And then they were killed later, in a manner to fit their descriptions. To find the next corpse, I had to go out through the back door and search around outside a bit. Does he end up finding the well, I wonder? Behind the mansion, the wild-grown bushes that were almost swallowed up by the forest, there was something like an old well. Right next to it, Dr. Nanjo and Shannon-chan's corpses. Both corpses had their heads smashed. And, though they weren't stuck in, there were stakes lying right next to each damaged head. Each corpse was atrocious, but having to look directly at Shannon-chan's lovely face, which had been half blown away, was very painful. Then, there was the well. I'd heard that inside it was a secret underground passage to the mysterious mansion, Kuidorian, but it looks to have a grate on it. By this time, I'd begun to think that Beatrice and her accomplices might have used this underground passage and left the Kuidorian. Even though there had apparently been at least 10 of them, I hadn't seen a trace of anyone. It seemed very likely that they'd already escaped to a different location. This typhoon. They can't go out to sea. But because Kuidorian has its own harbour, there might have been someone there. There could have been another boat. It goes the same for the forest. There's no way they could traverse such a deep, uncultivated forest on foot. So yeah, while the boat driver didn't know about it, well, was supposed to be one of the only few people to know about it and hadn't been there for a while, the people, the Madera family, had already been there, had already gotten to Kuidorian and were waiting for Ranjie to arrive. So they had to have gotten there somehow. Seems like someone else might know about the harbour. In that case, they had only one place to go. The mysterious hidden mansion, Kuidorian. Through the secret underground passage at the bottom of the well. At this time, I had entirely lost my fear of being killed if I happened to come across the enemy. Don't fuck with me. This time I'll storm into your mansion. The old well had a firm cover on it. The cover was an iron grill. The gaps between bars were perhaps 20 centimeters across. You could peer inside, but it really wasn't something a human could pass through. If I hadn't known better, I wouldn't have thought it was anything more than a simple cover to prevent falls. But from what Kiryu-san had told me, I knew that its purpose was to prevent intruders from entering the secret underground passage in its depths. The cover was extremely firm and rigid, and no matter how much I pushed or pulled, I couldn't even get close to opening it. I couldn't find any obvious lock. It might be sealed by some mechanism. But no matter how much I investigated it, I couldn't find anything to release it. The biggest piece of information Kiryu-san had tried to give me, gambling her final moments, was the underground passage in this well.
こんな二程度で俺を阻めると思うんじゃねえぜ。こいつをぶち壊してやる。
Good luck.
その道具を探そう。
I had an idea. After all, I'd seen the various tools in the gardening shed when we locked Goda-san and Kumasawa in there. shutter to the gardening shed was locked. On top of that, the key was with Gorda-san, who was dead on the inside. In other words, this gardening shed was a closed room. There's no way to open it from the outside. In that case, I've got to break the shutter. There has to be a tool for that somewhere. Kind of feels like I'm going in circles here. Then, while searching for that, I learned that the source of the stench that had permeated the mansion this whole time was the underground boiler room. The boiler room was dimly lit, humid, smelled horrible, and on top of that was incredibly creepy. There were several large tools there. I managed to find a fire hatchet and some massive wire cutters. And grandfather's corpse. No. Strictly speaking, I should probably say that I found a burnt corpse of a person who was probably grandfather. Someone's corpse had been stuffed into the blazing fires of the boiler. However, by coincidence, I was able to notice the number of toes on the corpse. Both feet had 6 toes. That's right. I think I heard it from Dad sometime long ago. Something about grandfather having polydactyly with extra toes. According to old Rushomia family tradition, it seems that those with extra fingers or toes had some kind of good fortune and were treated as a good omen. Because of that, grandfather was selected to be the successor or something. But I wonder if I can be certain that this is grandfather's body just from the number of toes. Nope. After all, grandfather was supposed to be the leader of a group of culprits. I didn't have a clue why he'd get stuffed into a boiler in a place like this and die. A mysterious corpse, burning and spitting out a terrible stench amid the flames. It really was grandfather. Did that mean that the leader of a group of culprits wasn't grandfather, but Beatrice after all? Grandfather was used because he was convenient, and was then thrown away. Fortunately, it didn't look like I'd be given a chance to hear grandfather's side of the story. Feature Watem here. I'm cutting this into parts, so I hope you've enjoyed this one. Let me know any feedback you have in the comments, and until next time, see ya.